Mike Braun unveils his broad first-year agenda. Randy Head steps down as Indiana GOP chair, plus a charter school lobby and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review, for the week ending December 6th, 2024.
Indiana Week in Review is made possible by the supporters of Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations.
This week, Governor-elect Mike Braun released a detailed policy agenda focused on 5 areas: tax relief, government efficiency, workforce development, health care, and public safety. Many of the details in Braun's agenda are drawn from proposals he released during the campaign, notably his property tax plan. He wants to revert property tax bills to 2021 levels and cap future increases at 2 to 3%. In health care, Braun wants to expand primary care options for Medicaid members, provide small businesses with more tax support for their employees' health insurance, and implement an independent audit of state health insurance programs. Much of his agenda will require legislative approval, and Braun says he wants to wear lawmakers out with collaboration.
Working in the trenches with legislators on those key agenda items so that you're not trying to ram it through to where there's going to be a consensus and a feel for what is practical to get done out of the gate.
There are plans Braun can enact unilaterally. That includes adding more options at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles that don't require in-person assistance, creating a one-stop shop in state government for Indiana farmers to access services, and establishing a commission to develop a comprehensive energy and water plan for the state. Is Mike Braun biting off more than he can chew? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Elise Shrock, Republican Mike O'Brien, John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers, and Leslie Bonilla Muñiz, reporter for the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting State House Bureau Chief Brandon Smith. Elise Shrock, is Braun going too broad with this initial agenda?
It is wide-reaching, and it is difficult historically for a governor, even with a supermajority, to find, consensus on this many issues. I do think there are some things I think that there could be bipartisan consensus on, and maybe this is me just feeling too much holiday spirit. And but I think House Democrat leader Phil Giaquinta said it best. Things like lowering health care costs and higher teacher pay. Those are things that I think you'll see Democrats, be on board with. However, I don't think that we can talk about some of these agenda items without also talking about universal pre-K, talking about child care relief. So there are some things missing that Democrats really want to talk about because those are Hoosier priorities.
Braun, in the interview I did with him, talked about he's looking at what he did as a freshman U.S. Senator and had a lot of success, at least according to some metrics. And one of the ways he felt like he did that was trying to work across the aisle whenever possible. No need to do that here in Indiana with the makeup of the legislature, but how do you think this process is going to play out for Braun working with the legislature?
I think it's going to work out well. I think a lot of this has been well received. I'm reminded of working for Mitch Daniels in 2005 when he first took office. He had a stack of executive orders reorganizing government under the authority that the governor had. And I remember he wanted the IEDC bill, the bill that created the Economic Development Corporation, passed by the state of the state, which was in 2 weeks. So from introduction to passage and signature, he wanted it done in 2 weeks, and the legislature said, that's really nice, and it passed 2 months later. So, so there's always that interplay, right, between the governor and the legislature, no matter who's in charge. But in terms of is he biting off too much? Look, he's got 80 agencies, 32,000 employees. He just created these 8 elevated cabinet positions that are going to be higher profile positions, where he's proposed to restructure state government in these kind of vertical agencies that are going to work with each other, have their own leads, but then have a kind of a cabinet level lead that's a higher profile, more accountable person. So look, he's building a team that can do a lot and is going to be focused on doing a lot. And this, the plan that he released this week, there's a lot in there, but had it been 2 pages long, we'd be talking about how he's not doing enough.
That's right. The thing that I feel like one of the things that Mike Braun seems most personally passionate about is healthcare reform. It's something he talks a lot about what he did in his business. He talked about it in the U.S. Senate a lot and tried to work towards that in the U.S. Senate.
And now he's talked a lot about in the campaign, and it plays a starring role in this. But at the same time, he also said to me, and he said to others, that's the one that I don't think is going to happen right away. That I want to get a lot of this done in my first year, but that's the one that's probably going to take the most time. Is that just the reality?
There are a lot of moving pieces and parts when you look at healthcare costs. And we also have to remember that a lot of the reforms and one would hope improvements that have been put in place in recent years are just now sort of getting up and running in terms of transparency and dashboards and other tools designed to give consumers a better handle on where they can get the most affordable health care. You're right, it's a passion of his. He talks about how not only as a public servant, but as a manager and company owner himself, I think it's 16 years without a premium increase with his own workplace. Which I'm sure he's eager to see what he can bring to the table, because this is a critically important issue. I'd say if there's one other winner that stands out in the agenda or special interest group, although it's hardly a special interest group, I'd say it's farmers and others who live in rural Indiana. The reason I say that, and I think it's intentional, this will not be the Indianapolis-centric governor. I think he's throughout the campaign and the primaries, it's talked about much more of a regional, rural-based approach. You look at what farmers would get out of this agenda, one-stop shopping for when they come to the state house or state government offices. You look at stabilization of farming income. You look at better handle on water usage and land usage. A lot of
specific investments in rural businesses.
Right, and even health care. That's not directly related to farmers, but rural Indiana, which is woefully short. As far as I'll end with this, the overall thrust, I don't think the scope is any broader really than any other governor. I went back to Bob Orr and looked at and they all say the same three main topics, and it's economic development, job creation, a good workforce, schools, that's part of it. And then that's the thrust. The healthcare costs have come and gone, but education, workforce development, those are the constants here. And maybe there's more specificity in some of the proposals.
Well, I want to ask about that specific point, which is one of the biggest pieces and something he talked about a lot in the campaign for obvious reasons. All of the candidates did, was property tax reform. He's still with the specificity of, I want to go back to 2021 levels and then cap future increases. I think cap future increases the legislature might discuss, but it seems really unlikely lawmakers are going to buy into rolling back property tax bills 3 years, essentially. Is he putting too much on the line by being that specific about that high profile an issue?
I mean, we had the same discussion all throughout the primary election season with Suzanne Crouch, then a candidate who was running on axing, taxes. Like, we had that discussion all the time of, is that even going to be possible? And I think in the end, it really just matters how well you can direct that message to people, and then how much progress you can make, even if you don't get there all the way. But yeah, it seems it's unclear how far lawmakers can even go, because we still need to keep to a market-based system, and we can't, mess around too much. Yeah, we can't.
Don't forget who has the bully pulpit, though, to declare himself the winner or loser at the end of the session. I'm sure this governor, as everyone that has preceded him, will have the easel or the dry erase board, if we're high, or maybe even higher tech than that now, where you have the things I wanted to accomplish and then check marks. And it's all in the framing of them. He could say, with property tax reform, that was a discussion starter. That was
and that's,
part of the
to be fair, he's been saying that all along.
None of these bills
when you
end the way they
define your
start.
success in the day after the session, you're probably going to come out a winner. We can make that a safe prediction.
All right, time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question. And this week's question is, will Governor-elect Mike Braun be able to accomplish most of his broad agenda in his first year in office? A, yes, or B, no. A couple weeks ago now, we asked you whether Senator Greg Taylor should resign following accusations of sexual harassment. 78% say yes, 22% say no. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Well, Indiana Republican Party Chair Randy Head stepped down from that position this week, returning full-time to his lobbyist position ahead of the legislative session. Political scientist Michael Wolff says political party chairs provide leadership and coordination across their state organizations.
bring together local party leadership along with recruitment of candidates and have those people really be able to optimize and win elections. So it's an extraordinarily important position.
Wolf says historically party chairs are more moderate voices as they try to get factions within their party to work together. That's less true now as politics is increasingly polarized, but Wolf says the next chair of the Indiana GOP will still need to work toward that purpose.
Try and have somebody that can work across, again, a very diverse ideological regional state like Indiana.
Party chairs are often selected by the highest elected state official in the party, in this case, Governor-elect Mike Braun.
Mike O'Brien, what should Mike Braun be looking for in the next state party chair?
Let's not forget Randy Head's biggest accomplishment in the last year, which is officiating my wedding with Lacey. we go way back, and he's a dear family friend and did just a tremendous job in the last 6 months, coming out of the primary, coming out of the convention, and really
which was not exactly the smoothest transition in the world.
No, it's always a lot to manage. I mean, what you're looking for in the next role is someone that has Randy's characteristics, which were you're a steady hand. You're not sunk in one faction of the party or the other. You're trying to see the whole field, get out there like he did, and drive to every county in the state and speak at every Lincoln Day dinner and connect the party outside of Indianapolis mostly. We're pivoting right into we get a year off, so the parties reorganize, and both parties reorganize in March. And then we pivot right into, by mid-year, we're thinking about mayoral races, or municipal races in midterms in 26 and municipal races in 27, and building that bench and building that groundwork for the next election year. It never ends. We just reset it.
Right. Mike Braun has talked about how he thought Micah Beckwith joining the ticket, despite Mike Braun's wishes, united the sort of two factions of the Indiana Republican Party, which was the more conservative wing that obviously Beckwith represents, and then the more establishment wing, if you want to call it that Braun clearly represents more. I mean, you look at some of his cabinet appointments, there are some familiar names in a lot of cases. How much will the next state party chair tell us how that partnership might be going?
I'm not sure, because they're going to be having to do a lot of cleanup for Micah Beckwith, because what consistently happens is whatever Mike Braun's agenda is, whatever the new GOP state chair's intentions are, Micah Beckwith is going to do his own thing and tends to speak out and do whatever Micah Beckwith wants to do. And so whoever the next person is going to be, is going to have to do the cleanup job for that. So despite who they are, and Indiana deserves two parties that are healthy, with leaders that are healthy, and I agree Randy Head is a leader with integrity, someone who I've also known for a long time. And so, we need both of our parties to be led with integrity and led with good leadership. So I hope that happens, obviously, for all of our parties. But when it comes down to it, that position is going to end up having to probably spend a lot of their time responding to what Micah Beckwith says.
But respond to who? Because he does represent a wing of the party that believes those things that he's saying. He's not like some rando
fair,
on the outside.
But it takes up a lot of, it tends to make headlines when there are other things that I'm sure y'all would like to be talking about, more substantive things that you would like to be talking about that you're doing in the legislative session, or that you're doing.
I just think it remains to be seen. I mean, I love the expectation being set that this is just going to be a disaster, because anything short of that is like.
I'm not saying it's going to be a disaster. I'm saying it's realistic. It will be messy.
I don't see that. I mean, he's going to have his one-off things. Yeah, he's got his tweets that.
It has been messy.
But I don't know.
The convention was messy. The election was messy.
But it wasn't. It was messy if you're a Democrat, or if you're a establishment Republican, you're like, boy, I really wish we would have gotten something else out of that. If you're a huge segment of the party, you're like, no, I'm for that. I'm for what was just said. And we're a deeply red state, and it continues to be proven. So we're a mess that won by 20 points.
Well, so to that end then, historically the role of party chairs have been more of the establishment wing, for the reason that is literally the establishment a lot of times. But in Indiana particularly, they haven't been people who sound off everywhere, who make headlines on their own, the way some party chairs in some states absolutely are. But given the growing segment of the Indiana Republican Party that is of the Micah Beckwith wing, who are happy to have somebody who spouts off about whatever crazy conspiracy theory or right-wing cause they happen to be, passionate about that day. Are we going to start to see more of those personalities rise more to the fore in the party structure?
Yeah, I was thinking that the other option for this is less of a cleanup crew and more of someone that bridges that gap and gives voice to those concerns from that wing of the party. Now that you've got someone literally second highest position, second highest position in the state,
with a microphone every day in front of
them. That's a huge point of visibility for people who are further right on the spectrum, and we might see that reflected because someone needs to further bring those together, and you might see that reflected in the next choice. But I mean, obviously, it's also got to be someone with connections across the state that can fundraise, because that was another big part of Randy Head's resignation email was record-breaking funding, and so that's a basic.
I think the average person would go, well, head of the Indiana Republican Party right now has got to be the easiest job in the world because they just win everything everywhere except for Marion County and Lake County, and even then. Is it really that easy?
No, I'd say it's tougher because of the grasp on power at so many levels, both at local municipal government, county government, state legislative government. You have to answer not only to factions of the party, your own party, but to those various constituencies, which sometimes don't see eye to eye. When you cut taxes at the state level, oftentimes that means shifting the burden to the locals or vice versa. So it's not everybody in lockstep. Just as I've said, that when you're president pro tem or House Speaker of a caucus that is a supermajority, it tends to be more difficult than if you can have your message control of a minority or a very narrow majority. But it's, it'll be interesting to see. He can be a bridge builder, or she, whoever the successor is, but the keeper of the toll bridge will still be the governor. I would think has to by design. And if you look, and that's apparent again in the agenda, we were just talking about how broad it is in scope. Yes, but what does it not include? Social issues. It's a throwback in some ways, it seems to me, to Mitch Daniels, and let's have a moratorium on social issues, with the perhaps exception you could argue about universal school choice, which is maybe in the middle.
Social issues will make it in there.
Well, I didn't say they wouldn't get in there. I said what is the agenda and what will be the governor's interest in keeping the focus on that agenda.
All right, Indiana's charter schools have lacked an organized group to advocate for policy changes, but now a new organization hopes to increase funding for charters across the state. From WFYI's education desk, Rachel Fredette has more.
Traditional school districts receive local property tax dollars to pay for buildings and transportation. But Indiana's charter schools don't get those same funds. The newly created Indiana Charter Innovation Center seeks to change that. The group will ask lawmakers to consider that during the 2025 legislative session. Scott Bess is the group's founder. He also sits on the State Board of Education.
Priority number 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, 6 is that kind of equitable funding, like looking at how do you close the gap with the districts that are by most of our charter schools.
Bess says he doesn't think a focus on expanding private school vouchers will hinder the group's plan for charter schools. He says they want the same thing, the money to follow the child.
We want access to the local money.
The state's largest teachers union and other traditional public school advocates are critical of funding streams that flow directly to charters.
Leslie, many people are expecting, I'm one of them, expecting lawmakers to restrict school ballot referendums this session in some way, whether to only general elections or only general elections in, the presidential and midterm elections, to any sort of other thing. Yeah. Does that conversation make what this group is trying to achieve easier or harder?
I think in some ways it could complicate it because you'll have, I'm expecting to see traditional public schools come to the State House and say, hey, if you pass these restrictions, you're already squeezing us. Like, we still educate most of the students in the state, and we need resources, more resources, not fewer. But I also think that, when I talked to Scott Bess, he was said that this is sort of a medium to long-term plan, that they don't see this happening 0 to 100 right away, that it's, he described more of a phased-in approach, and so I would kind of expect them to just get a foot in the door with that logic that the money follows the child, it follows the student. This is just an extension of that, and I think that's a message that legislative leaders will continue to be receptive to, and so I wouldn't be surprised if they just kind of get it started and that maybe that gains traction.
Yeah. John, same question. Easier or harder when you're already having this conversation about school referendums?
It certainly complicates it because studies show that the charters have received, adjusted for inflation, a decent amount of money from the state over the years, but the knock has been, or the concern on the part of operators of these schools is they haven't shared in the levy dollars. And if there are restrictions on that aspect of the funding pipeline, well, certainly that is a complicator. But frankly, I'm surprised there wasn't an organization dedicated to this constituency before, because as we move more toward the notion that dollars are going to follow students, and that seems to be the drumbeat here, this is a matter of having everybody being represented. Yeah. So you have traditional public education, you had certainly various voucher or school choice advocates, but this sort of fills a seat at the table for that important discussion.
What do you think is the future of sharing referendum dollars with charter schools?
Well, if they open that door, then I think the future of it is it'll be baked into the increase. Yeah. Right. The schools.
So it won't be. We're asking for 2%. It's not going to be 3%.
Yeah, you're going to have to accommodate for it. Right. Yeah. And arguably, I mean, if you believe what a lot of legislators are arguing, which is we need to move these referenda to higher turnout elections. Yeah. General election, even number of years, whatever. Arguably, you say, well, look, these voters are focused on this, and I've been a part of a lot of referenda, and they are not secret campaigns. Even if it's 10 or 12% turnout, those people know what they're coming for. Yeah. That's why the results are so consistent. It's either the school made the case and the community believes that the school needs those dollars, or they don't.
I would just say, I would push back on the notion that there's not a seat at the table already. I mean, the person starting this organization sits on, if I'm not mistaken, the State Board of Education. The phrase money following the child is something that has been used for
decades.
Yeah, decades. So this notion is not new. We need to be really careful when we're talking about taking money from traditional public schools, because they are underfunded. We know that we're talking about increasing teacher pay. We're talking about how we can better fund our public schools. So anytime we're talking about taking resources away from them, we need to really think critically about what we're doing.
All right. Healthcare, public safety, and school safety. Those are the issues that Hoosiers want the state government to focus on in 2025. That's according to results from the latest edition of the Hoosier Survey by the Bowen Center for Public Affairs at Ball State University. More than 600 people were surveyed, and Interim Director Kevin Smith says those three issues were rated moderately or very important by nearly all of them.
And that was an outcome that did not vary based on political affiliation.
The survey also asked about whether the state's primary taxes, income, sales, and property, are fair. And despite state policymakers' recent focus on property tax reform, Smith says the survey shows that Hoosiers view the state sales tax as the most unfair of the three.
A simple answer could be that this is something that people experience on a daily basis, as opposed to the property tax hitting them less frequently.
Nearly half of those surveyed said the sales tax is somewhat or very unfair, while a little over a third said the same about property taxes. John Schwantes, on the tax question. We've already talked a lot about property taxes at this table so far, and that's been the conversation for months and months. Are you surprised that it's the sales tax rated most unfair by Hoosiers?
Not necessarily, because this, if I'm not mistaken, was conducted, these interviews, the first week in November. Mm-hmm. What else happened? That was the election, as I recall, if I remember my calendar. And what was the number one issue that we heard about at the state level, at the federal level? Inflation, cost of living. I can't buy a loaf of bread. I can't feed my family. I can't buy a car. I can't do this. Well, which tax plays into the notion of affordability? Sales tax.
Yeah, you're looking at it every day. Right?
That was what you look at every day versus the other taxes, which you may be outraged when you see your assessment. Mm-hmm.
And it's harder to see things on your paycheck necessarily than, we have an income tax cut coming in January. I doubt most people will know about it unless they read about it in the news when I write that story in a couple months.
And when you look at
weeks.
the percentage of if you buy some big ticket item, that can be a nice chunk of change. So I think that's what has to do with it. I think this poll is valuable because it looks at people's views about some of the nuances of issues, abortion regulation, but in terms of what are the 3 big issues, it's a list of 15. They're just reading it and saying what matters to you.
And I mean, I don't think any of those 3 are really surprises.
No, but I think if you didn't prompt people and you said, what issue are you most concerned about, you get a much more, you get a different outcome.
Yeah.
And it's
by
the
far.
way
And
the question is asked.
It's just,
what is fair?
Right.
And Hoosiers want people to pay their fair share.
Yeah. All right, that's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Elise Shrock, Republican Mike O'Brien, John Schwantes of Indiana Lawmakers, and Leslie Bonilla Muñiz of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at WFYI.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time because a lot can happen in an Indiana week.
The opinions expressed are solely those of the panelists. Indiana Week in Review is a WFYI production in association with Indiana's public broadcasting stations.